There's something beautiful about acknowledging the absurdity of life. But there's a balance to it. It's not just saying, well, that happened, like in a Marvel movie, but using the momentum provided by that absurdity to reach for something real. Like experiencing something absurd in real life, and acknowledging that, because you wouldn't have wanted to experience it with anyone other than the people who experienced it with you. That same idea is seen in a lot of films nowadays due to the concept of Metamodernism, the school of thought that uses postmodernist critiques of the world with a more positive outlook, looking to find solutions. The rejection of nihilism in favor of Absurdism. So, while current-day Marvel movies may be postmodern with their lack of sincerity, acknowledging their absurdity to make fun of it instead of to embrace it.
You can't be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man if there's no neighborhood. Okay, that didn't really make sense, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Which is an idea I've talked about before in a video where I talked about the humor in the MCU and how they learned the wrong lessons from Joss Whedon's style of dialogue writing after Avengers 2012. You also have movies like Everything Ever All at Once, where the absurdity is a huge part of the point, and it's used to make a point about the meaning of life, of finding beauty in the mundane, because if nothing matters, if it's all stupid, then everything matters, everything can matter, as long as it personally matters to you. Now, I do love a lot of postmodern and modern works, but there's something special about metamodernism in movies that I think appeals to the filmmaker brain that I have, with a focus on the artifice of films and the process of filmmaking. For a very long time, most movies and shows try to be very realistic, to make it feel like those works are part of the real world, or a world similar to ours, like Top Gun, for example, which the sequel Top Gun Maverick also uses similar storytelling devices to appear realistic and grounded, falling more into the modernist style of filmmaking. But nowadays, a lot of films reject the idea of realism in favor of what's called hyperrealism, using absurd visuals and storytelling devices to point towards the idea they want to express without taking themselves too seriously. An example of that is the way they called the USB drive they need in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
He called it an override key.
There's always a bypass key, a virus key, a who cares key I can never remember, so I always call it a goober.
The movie is aware of the trope of needing a magical device to disable the villain's evil machine and foil their evil plan, and instead of giving a name to this device, Spider-Man just uses a nickname he gave for it. A goober. It's using a storytelling trope and calling attention to itself by acknowledging the overuse of said trope in superhero movies, while at the same time not being ashamed of it. A lot of the time, it feels like movies are ashamed to be movies. Like they're not supposed to tell a story worth telling, like they're just escapism, which is why the humor in something like Deadpool and Wolverine feels so dated to an era that was all about the lack of sincerity.
There's nothing that'll bring me back to life faster than a big bag of Marvel cash. Me too, Hugh.
But movies are so much more than that, and the films that tell stories sincerely, knowing that they have a story worth telling, and more than that, that it is worth telling stories. This is why stories about stories appeal to me. One of my favorite shows is Community, and that show plays around with the fourth wall and the idea of what their show is and the absurdity of it all the time. Not to make fun of itself, but to create something real around the artifice it acknowledges.
A lot of single cameras right now embrace a very cynical tone and of something perhaps started with Arrested Development, was this sort of very acerbic.
And Seinfeld. Yeah.
And Seinfeld.
No hugging, right?
Yeah, it's anti-emotion, it's anti...
perfect strangers.
Larry David is so funny being... And he's actually not... He's not a cynical voice, but he's so funny being cynical.
Yeah.
You all of a sudden you have like this dark age of like complete, like everyone's saying to everybody, stop talking, stop being human, stop. I don't want to hear that. That's the punchline. Shut up. Oh, don't go there. You take your shirt off.
So
I don't want
lame
to look
when
at
you're
you.
being
Yeah.
We said let's go back in another direction. Let's embrace an older sensibility, and that's why we started using John Hughes as a reference. He mixed intelligent comedy with human emotion, and
And every show that got picked up and made a splash that year, Glee, Modern Family, namely, like we were a part of some kind of spontaneous sort of decision to do that. This post-ironic, post-cynical.
I teared up when we were shooting this.
Community is a sitcom that satirizes sitcoms, but that isn't ashamed of being a sitcom. It embraces the sitcom aspects of itself while also poking fun at and highlighting the tropes it falls into for comedic effect. Abed sees the world through filmmaking eyes, filters the world through the media he consumes, and the show doesn't argue that's a bad thing, because, like TV shows and movies, life is absurd. But the characters gain comfort from that absurdity by sharing these moments of absurdity with the study group, which is why the moments of fully leaning into an insane premise in Community work so well. like the paintball episodes or the pillow fight episode or any of the other many homages to genres of film and TV or to specific shows and movies. The show fully leans into its premises by having the characters fully lean into them too. So, because the characters act like all of these ridiculous moments matter, they matter to the audience. It's classic lampshade hanging. These moments might be very silly, but the filmmakers find meaning and emotion within that silliness by embracing it.
Well, it's a pretty good scientific example of the nature of our show, what makes it different from other shows where you get spoofy conceptual elements. Ludwig Göransson and the live orchestra he recorded with, Anthony Russo's camera, the DP, all of those are understanding how dramatic that moment is. But the real circumstances within the fourth wall of the narrative, the reality is it's just this little Atari graphic. And that's sort of how we think about the as with paintball and stuff like that. It's like, okay, the reality is here, but we choose to view it dramatically or intensely.
Yeah.
Saying all that, I obviously have to talk about Everything Everywhere All at Once, a movie that is all about finding meaning in the meaninglessness by embracing absurdity. It's almost a metamodernist film, where it not only uses the artifice, the presentation and the absurdity of the story of the movie to make a point about life, but also talks about the absurdity of that lack of meaning, which therefore creates meaning within itself.
That's like 16 walls.
It argues that life being meaningless, that nothing mattering and everything being random and pointless is all reason for everything to matter. It uses the absurdity of its premise and presentation to talk about the absurdity of life, and I find that beautiful. It's why it's my favorite film of all time. I think that aspect is what's most appealing to me about most stories, where they don't try to feel realistic anymore and just create art for art's sake, to make a real point about life and society without restraining their creative vision for the sake of simplicity or realism.
Art is a lie, nothing is real.
For example, in Legion Season 2, and yes, I'm bringing Legion into this, the show talks about the idea of delusions and how they can form, comparing them to eggs.
A delusion starts, like any other idea, as an egg.
And so, later in the season, when there's an outbreak of a mental virus that causes the characters to start believing in delusions and conspiracies, we see a visual of their headquarters being filled with cracked eggs. The show is making a point about the way a delusion can spread, how it can take over not just one's mind, but maybe a whole community if left unchecked, and uses the metaphor that delusions are like eggs, and makes it literal by representing them with actual eggs that spread insanity. Legion as a show is full of this. It uses hyperrealism with visual metaphors that are transformed into real, literal manifestations of concepts the show wants to explore, because it may as well, because it's art, because it's fiction, and it doesn't have to conform to reality. Legion leans into its absurdism, especially being a show that questions reality.
Reality's a choice.
Relating to David's own warped perception of reality and his powers to affect reality. It works really well as a narrative device because it incorporates the premise of the show into its presentation, finding meaning even in the lack of meaning, the lack of reality the show represents.
Sometimes in a dream, you remember you've had this dream before. But that memory is just part of the dream. The dream memory of a dream.
Even Mr. Robot, which is a show often praised for its realism, is at its most appealing to me when it leans into metamodernism, when the protagonist acknowledges the audience and breaks the fourth wall, going on tirades about society and the meaning of life, which would fall into postmodern cynicism, but uses said cynicism to build something optimistic and positive out of it.
Fuck society. Society deserves to be hated for everything you said they did and more. I will not give up on this world. And if you can't see why, then I speak for everyone when I say, fuck you!
I also can't neglect to mention the film that most perfectly encapsulates everything I love about metamodernism, Asteroid City. Wes Anderson crafted a film about artifice, about how art is crafted, peeling back the layers of what it means to make art, and blending its many fourth walls together to show the thin line between artifice and reality through artistic expression. The movie uses absurdism, both in Asteroid City, the play within the TV show within the movie, with the setting of the Cold War creating a feeling of detachment between the characters in the play and their reality, the same way all these crazy events happen in the real world, and we feel detached from them as we try to find meaning within our own lives, as the world at large continues moving forward, but also within all these layers of having the actors that are performing the play within the movie question their performances, trying to find meaning within them.
I don't play him as an alien, actually. I play him as a metaphor. That's my interpretation.
Metaphor for what?
I don't know yet. We don't pin it down.
Which Wes Anderson uses to argue that, through the artifice of filmmaking, the many layers of fakeness that exist within a film to create this false reality that is meant to somehow reflect the real world, there exists a real meaning and expression within it, a truth underneath it all. That the characters might be fake, but the emotions they're making the audience feel are real, because they come from real feelings expressed by the writer, the director, and the actors.
Real, fake, it's all the same.
There's an absurdity to creating art that Wes Anderson leans into with every film, but especially Asteroid City with its hyperreality, making everything seem especially fake, just representing general ideas of real objects and feelings he wants to portray.
Metaphor for what?
I don't know yet. We don't pin it down.
This is a film that argues about the importance of art, of telling stories, even if they're just small parts of understanding yourself in the world, in the midst of all the chaos around all of us. The reason these types of stories appeal to me so much has to do with my love of filmmaking, since metamodernist films often reference their own process of filmmaking or other films with their meta aspects, which tickles the autistic part of my brain that loves movies.
Movie reference.
And because it appeals to the idea of the absurdity of life, which, as someone in my early 20s, I'm now realizing how absurd life truly is. How everyone I thought had their life figured out when I was a kid actually is just as much of a mess as me or anyone else. Which is something that can be terrifying but also comforting. And these types of stories appeal to the comforting side of the chaos of life that I find very heartwarming when told with the required sincerity. That search for meaning within a chaotic, meaningless life that feels nice to embrace and find the true meaning within ourselves, letting go of understanding everything in favor of feeling it instead.
I still don't understand the play.
Doesn't matter. Just keep telling the story. You're doing them right.